So the new ContraPoints video is called Men. I know there's some discourse about the channel in the trans community and whether her takes are representative. I guess I'm going to add to that, but she has 700,000 subscribers, and 8 of the 9 videos she released in the past year have been explicitly about gender. So we have a lot to talk about. Natalie, as a trans woman, talks about gender from the perspective of a trans woman, and only 2 of those 8 videos address the issue of non-binary identities in a meaningful way, transgenders and the second half of pronouns. Rarely does she bring up trans men at all, and every time I've noticed it has been a tongue-in-cheek comment on how the discourse leaves us out entirely in the intros of gender critical and autogynephilia. But this video is called Men, and it's about men. More specifically, it's about her large audience of cis men, how traditional ideas of masculinity are preyed on by right-wing extremists, and the lack of a 21st century male ideal. She acknowledges that masculinity is culturally in a precarious place right now and can cause just as much gender troubles as anyone else. I actually appreciate this framing that gender is politically more than just being trans or a feminist at this time. Everyone is having gender woes. She considers masculinity from the cis male perspective, from the cis female perspective, and her own perspective as a trans woman who transitioned well into her adult life. But there's nothing about the trans male experience, not even an offhand comment about how they're not going to be mentioned. It's completely absent, and I think this is a huge oversight. I don't think trans women and trans men need to always be equally represented in every discussion about transness, and most of Natalie's trans videos are specific to the trans feminine experience. I might have appreciated some discussion of TERF talking points on trans men in the gender critical video, because the way they treat women versus how they treat men is very different, but it's hard to research unless you talk to a trans man who's in the public sphere. You can go read this article by Jay Holm on the subject. I'll leave it in the description. But in a video about masculinity that includes trans perspectives, leaving out the trans masculine voice is a mistake. If there's no ideal of a non-toxic masculinity, what do you think trans men are trying to transition into? This isn't a call-out video. It's a response. I'm just filling in the blanks like I always do. So what are trans men transitioning into? What is a man? What is masculinity in 2019? These are kind of unfair questions, to be honest. Some people get pretty mad when trans people answer them. And it's so esoteric. It's so hard to describe. I'm not an expert in gender studies or philosophy. I've only been transitioning for a year. And when I started transitioning, I was still identifying as firmly non-binary. It took me months to settle into the male social role and feel comfortable in the male identity, but I think about this question all the time. If you're watching this, I'm going to assume you're already on board with the idea that trans and gender nonconforming people are valuable to discussions of what gender means, as people who have lived in multiple places on the spectrum. I hope that other trans people will see this video and add to the discussion. I can only offer my perspective. So let's start with why femininity wasn't working for me. When I entered my adolescent years, it wasn't physical changes to my body I started finding uncomfortable first. I was a pretty late bloomer, and I didn't get my first period until I was almost 16. But people started telling me what I was supposed to be doing with my body much earlier than that. Telling me I needed to start wearing bras, I needed to start shaving my legs and my armpits, I needed to dress up more. I was just like, why? Is my hair really that much more unhygienic? Can you even see my boobs in this shirt? I wore long jeans in the summer so I wouldn't have to shave. My hips got wider and I kept hitting them on the corners of tables, so I made sure not to gain weight to keep my proportions as neutral as possible. I was doing theater, and in the dressing room, a girl told me I was going to be such a cute pregnant lady. I was having nightmares that the boy I had a crush on would want to have sex with me. At least as far as I can tell, the primary factor in a trans man's decision to transition is discomfort in a female social role, particularly after puberty. The emphasis on appearance and manners and submissiveness felt like being trapped in a box I didn't fit in. Every time an older lady complimented me on my natural femininity when I wore like a dress to a public function, it was like another layer of wrapping paper around the box, cutting off my air. But was I masculine? Boyish? Maybe. I was terrible at sports. I liked butterflies and the Powerpuff Girls, but I always gravitated more towards wearing boys' clothes. But a discomfort with the social role of being pleasing for men to look at is not unique to the trans experience. Many women reject the acceptable norms of femininity and wear boys' clothes, but they don't cast aside their womanhood. In many cases, they are extremely proud to be women. So what is the difference? I tried wearing boys' clothes and going by a butchy nickname. Why wasn't that enough for me? Because for me, it wasn't just the social role, it was the body role. Body roles. When you're assigned female at birth and you reach a certain age, this thing starts happening to you where you bleed from your genitals 1 week out of every month, and if it doesn't happen, it could be because there's a chest burster growing inside of your body appropriating your hard-earned nutrients. You know who that doesn't happen to? Men. So what happens when you take the man potion? I've been on testosterone HRT for a year. I do IM intramuscular injections, which is the most masculine way to take hormones, because you can pretend you're a soldier in a trench, like self-administering adrenaline. It doesn't sterilize you, but it doesn't guarantee fertility either. It does stop your period, change your fat distribution, give you more upper body strength, and make your voice sound like baby Simba trying to roar. Some more interesting differences I noticed on the physical side are literally thicker skin from the first injection, and you don't cry as much. Starting new hormones is also a lot like puberty, and they feel a little out of balance at first. So early on in the process, I was highly emotional, especially the angry and horny emotions. But even taking testosterone isn't necessarily the difference between a queer woman and a queer man. There are many AFAB non-binary people who take testosterone for a lot of the same reasons that I do, but they're not interested in being men. And it's not the body alone that makes the difference between who carries the suitcase up the stairs. In my last video, I talked about the psychological journey that trans men go through when coming from a background of feminism, which most do, since feminism is where you go to learn that trans people exist. And through that lens, we can't assimilate into the traditional idea of masculinity. We have to find our own way to fit. I said earlier that it took me a long time to feel comfortable occupying the male identity, but before I knew it, I was in that social role whether I was ready for it or not. And masculinity, as we know it, is not, as I hoped, freedom. The alphas and chads, the incels and nice guys, the male excellence of the billionaire. This is not a diverse set of identities. Masculinity as we know it is defined by dominance, competition, ambition, conquest, resilience to damage, and martyrous sacrifice. So many of my interactions with other men became implicit or explicit challenges. Can you keep up with me? Step the fuck up if you want to be a man. And I know there are many cis men who, like me, didn't see a place for them in the idea of masculinity that they were presented. But the box that we put all those signifiers in and labeled man is falling apart, just like every other box of signifiers that we've tried to use in the course of human experience. If you feel limited by manhood and seek a new male, the answer lies in queer men. Consider the soft boy. He's artistic, emotionally open, compassionate. But see, now I've put myself in a situation where it sounds like I'm saying being a soft boy is what being a good man is. The soft boy archetype is a topic of contention in the trans mass community since a lot of guys feel infantilized or feminized by it, and emotional sensitivity can be leveraged in an abusive situation just as effectively as physical power. I can't just prescribe a new ideal of manhood to you, even if it is just a list of abstract attributes like openness and compassion. I think to define a new masculinity, we need to break the taboo associated with leaving the box. Reduce the shame associated with vulnerability, reduce the antagonism that comes when you wear clothes from the wrong side of the store. Men's business clothes haven't changed much in the past 100 years, and they were originally meant to invoke a soldier's uniform. reduce the urge to become a master, and introduce a more egalitarian idea of leadership. Maybe teach them how to like Superman. The beer was a mistake. When I chose my name, I changed my middle name to Clark. For me, the masculine ideal always comes back to Superman. Many men love the promise of Batman, the physical and intellectual peak of the human man in the DC universe, driven by trauma to defeat crime in his city. Superman is in many ways nothing like him. Batman bootstrapped his way into power. Sure, the money was inherited, but the physical training and the mental acuity were thanks to his own ability and hard work. Superman arrived on Earth, gifted by chance with power beyond human capability. But Batman is the one driven by the conquering masculinity. It is his job to clean up the streets. Superman, however, casts himself as the protector of innocence before anything else. He is an outsider. There is no other man like him on Earth. No one can match his strength, but Clark Kent is not driven to conquer. Instead, he fixes the problems that nobody else can fix. He's not human, but he was socialized to be, and he loves the planet and the people he grew up with. He represents the blue-collar farmer, the white-collar journalist, the mild-mannered nobody, and the most famous and powerful man on the planet. He represents the immigrant and the American in a general sense. He represents truth and justice and the working class. And in all the best Superman stories, even while he's plagued with the angst that he is not like other men, he goes out of his way to prevent the suffering of a stranger, because he knows the good he is capable of. I hope this video was illuminating. Hopefully this conversation will evolve further as more people chime in. I'll see you next time.